This, as you know, is set up very much for just for our MBA crowd and our friends and our alumni. And so the whole idea is to be sharing different topics. And tonight is very much a special interest topic. And I'll talk a little bit about how that may be of interest to you. You remember the first week we talked about presenting to win, both in the Zoom and traditional environments, was very, very tactical. So Connor just did the intro and we're welcoming everyone. And now it's very quickly a very specific content presentation. So we'd like to welcome everyone this evening. And as we get into the topic, just a reminder that our next huddle will be November 14th. And we're going to get into industry trends very specific to this post-COVID, hopefully. COVID seems to linger on environment, and we've been working very hard at putting that piece together. So tonight is about student athletes. And I thought a lot about this, and you think about MBA students and all of you, and you're experienced, and 87% of our students are working, and you probably are very often exposed to these types of individuals. Could be your children, could be a niece or a nephew, could be a family friend, could be an employee, could be an intern of the student athlete. And this is a book that I've written along with 4 colleagues, and it's been very, very successful and endorsed by the NCAA. And the second edition just came out. And so really, you don't even need to buy the book, because we're going to go through all the secrets tonight, and you'll have all the inside information. And really, I think for most of us on the call, it's going to be to help others. And that's really what stemmed us and drove us to write this particular book in the first place. We were all these types of athletes. All of the authors that wrote this particular book, and I was one of them, were former student athletes. And we were athletes that thought we were going to go places, and we all made mistakes along the way, and really perhaps over-prioritized our student athlete status, thought we were better than we were. And the numbers I'm going to show you in a second are very much of this reality that this typical student athletes faced. And Connor and I are working really, really extensively right now on a name, image, and likeness project. That's heightened the interest in this particular book, because all of a sudden there's this thought that student athletes can make lots and lots of money. It's not really happening for most. And so there's an interesting kind of dynamic there that furthers the kind of piece behind the book. I'm not going to spend too much time, but all of the authors there are friends. There's Rick Burton, Jake Hersham, Andy Dolich, and Heather Lawrence, plus myself, as I mentioned, all former athletes and all individuals who didn't go pro and did other parts in life. 3 academics and 2 industry people. So they mentioned it's a handbook. The NCAA has adopted, as we mentioned, or endorsed it, and a lot of universities have adopted it for their student athletes that early on book to use. We've seen very successful use from parents of athletes of student athletes who are going to university, and what they're going to think about and how they're going to do it. And so it's very, very much a help style book. And it's modeled off the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, which I think many of you have read. It's a real go-to for a lot of business professionals, that kind of thinking. So very specific, not academic at all. And our whole goal, this is a very inexpensive book, widely circulated, was not certainly to make any money, was to help people in our situation make better decisions and then be successful once they finish their experience as a student athlete and maximize that wonderful experience that it actually is. Here's the target markets, and I added you all at the bottom there, with the idea being that this could be something that you could help someone in your network make better decisions. And I think there's certainly elements of it that will help with anybody and what they could want it to do. So I mentioned the 5 of us. We also reached out to many, many industry people, former student athletes, commissioners, et cetera. They're all noted in the book that had really powerful impacts. It's a very empirical book, not just our opinions. It's based on what's kind of going on out there. As I mentioned, there's this real underlying issue and this misconception. I went through it as an athlete. Many people do, that you think you're going to the Olympics, you're going to turn pro, or you're going to go to, and it's really, really, really hard. And I'm just going to go through some NCAA provided data. There's a lot of it in the book, just to kind of update this. You can get a lot of it on their websites as well. And just the proportion of high school athletes that become collegiate athletes, proportion of collegiate athletes that become professional athletes. If you dig into some of the numbers and how many get drafted, if you look at the second to last column there, even for those that get to NCAA Division I, you're talking about 1 in 100. In the odd cases, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 in 100. Baseball, a little bit higher, who actually turn pro. But remember, a lot of baseball players play in the minor leagues, huge minor league system, not life-changing in terms of financial, life-changing sort of sport experience, but not life-changing financially in terms of your life. Just some more data there as you kind of go along each of the steps, the number of participants at high performers at the high school, down to NCAA, the 3 divisions, and then kind of rolling into pro and men's and women's. There's the odd sport where you see it's a little bit higher. Women's ice hockey, for instance, has a higher rate. Men's lacrosse from conversion rates, but still very, very challenging to move on and be very, very successful. And then the last slide is, and you can look at these more closely on the video recording, but you can just see that how the numbers just really, really go down in terms of who actually becomes pro. So there's something like 750,000 NCAA athletes that are competing at any time, any year across the country. And as you know, most of those are not going to make a living from the sports side of being a student athlete. Now, that's not to say being a student athlete is a wonderful thing. Like for me, it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. And it's the highest level that most of us ever get to compete at. Right after that, you start declining, you downhill, you may become a master's athlete, you play other things. But this kind of it's the end of that dream for most. We want to maximize that, but also maximize this other half of our lives, which is being a student. So this is the idea, and the book is really about creating this overall plan. And so a plan that's very custom. And so in addition to being a starter on the basketball team or hitting X number of home runs for the baseball team or making the doubles team for tennis or whatever your goal might be, there's these other goals you want to do academically, thinking about setting yourself up for the future of your career, managing your financial, having some element of a social life that most of us student athletes give up a lot of because you're either studying or you're training. And so this is kind of a good one here, that when you understand who a student athlete is think about this. And so this is the real challenge that a lot of student athletes face. And I went through it too. So you graduate, you have a degree, and you're a student athlete. But typically, you have nothing else. So a lot of these athletes did their internship with their coach. They instead of doing summer jobs, they picked certain ones to be close to home or ones that were in their sport or allowed them to train better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you're competing for that first job. And you can see the second bullet there, somebody who's done 2 internships, international exchange. They've worked in Africa with homeless people. They've done this. They've added these extra skills. They were president of the analytics clubs. You just don't have a chance. And so as much as it's nice that you're a student athlete, most employers are looking for these real deep set of tacit and soft skills, if you want to call them that someone brings to the job. And if they don't have student athlete has some of that, but you got to set yourself up for competing against those other things. So we talk about a lot of stuff, and the secret number 2 is what can you kind of do? Well, when you have extra time, I mean, a lot of athletes are famous for between 2 practices or practice in class, you play some video games or you hang out. Well, fix that time. Use it wisely. Start building other things. Maybe you are a member of a student club. Maybe you are building your brand, doing some social media stuff. Maybe you are connecting with professors or doing different things. Or maybe you are trying to work a part-time or an internship or a research kind of project and fitting it into your schedule. Maybe you opt out of partying. That's a big part of college, right? And we all did it. But maybe you say, hey, once a month I go out, and then I'm going to maximize my sleep, or I'm going to maximize my performance. Maybe you put dating on the shelf. Maybe you focus on other things. Maybe long-term relationships aren't for you. You see what I'm going? So you really maximize all that time. Because one thing we all learned looking back, me now 25 years later, I thought I was busy. I was not busy. You learn as you get older and you have a family and you have a job. You have your capacity is a lot harder than you think it is. And then that last one there, really think about things that are really beneficial to you and getting out of that. Oh, my coach says this is a good one to do. I'll do that. No, one that's going to further your career and get you out of that comfort zone is really important. Neil and Connor and I, as I mentioned, are doing a lot of this, and I'm going to roll through a lot of these secrets pretty quickly. But this is a really, really important one. And we just started peripherally talking about it in this edition, but I'm sure in the next edition, we'll get right into it. But a big question is, hey, is it for you? Are you the level of athlete? Are you an Olympic swimmer at Stanford? Are you the starting quarterback at Alabama? And if you're not at that kind of level, you probably want to think twice about this. We're talking a lot about athletes spending piles of time and energy for free t-shirts or gift certificates or very modest amounts of money. So really thinking about the long-term outcomes of your athletic and your academic pursuits, is that even worth kind of thinking about? One of the things that we build out in the book is this idea of a success wheel. And this fits with many psychology, publications that are out there for success in general. I mentioned the 7 habits of highly successful people. But if you just start to plot things down and this notion of a plan, you start thinking about all those things that you have, whether it's a mentor, managing your time, which I talked about. How do you keep yourself balanced in terms of school? Well, how are you building a network? So maybe you'll have a line at a first job when you finish. What major are you even in? I'll talk about that in a second. One of the other secrets, is it one that's useful and things that you can do? Or how are you prioritizing your time? So this idea that these all build on each other and you do them creatively. All of us, when we get to the MBA, have this figured out. Most 18-year-old student athletes do not, right? And so that's the whole idea of this particular piece. When you're kind of going through and you're planning, and we did last week, we did presentation skills. A lot of student athletes graduate from college having been a great athlete. They've never even done a presentation. They're often picking courses to be more time efficient, more flexible. They may be all online. They may be done in ones where they're large lecture formats where you can be flexible and not go there. They don't have lab or experiential or tutorial components. You don't have those skills. And you go down the list of things that you need to be successful in a job situation. How do you kind of build that out? Balance, balance, balance. So as you can imagine in life, all of us have this challenge when you've got 2 major undertakings, one being an athlete, a high performance athlete. So you're training anywhere from 15 to 40 hours a week, depending on your sport. And then you're trying to be a high performing student. So you're studying anywhere from 20 to 40 hours a week. Well, you do the math. You don't have that many hours left. And if you're sleeping 8 hours a night, trying to maintain a bit of a social life, maybe eat once in a while, have a shower, there's not much left, right? So balance is a huge piece of what we want to do. Kind of hinted at a little bit this early on, but we talk a lot about this idea of making smart decisions on just the other stuff. So how you spend your time, how you relate to your parents, who do you call each night to catch up with? How are you connecting with former friends and new friends? How are you doing? Can you manage this? If you're social media, can you get someone, an uncle, to do that for you? You go down the list of all the other stuff that you want to get done. How do you do it as efficiently as possible so you can be focusing on both of those outcomes and not just one? One of the brilliant things that we have as student athletes, particularly in Division I, is unbelievable amounts of support. The universities have everything you can imagine, from tutors to study halls to psychiatrists to mental health to physical health to recovery from injuries to coaching staffs that are world-class people. Regrettably, a lot of student athletes, particularly those that are not those super duper stars, don't take advantage of it. So you've got all this stuff in front of you. Use it, maximize it, take advantage of it. Don't wait before the night before your exam to say, oh, I think there's a tutor for our team. Get to know them early on, connect, learn, et cetera. Those kind of pieces as you kind of go forward. Your major really does matter. And this is something that when you're thinking about it, I fell into this trap. A lot of people do. You're thinking, well, how does it work with me being an athlete and da-da-da-da? And that's not the right approach, right? You want to really be thinking about a major that it makes sense. And one of the things we've learned, and there's lots of studies in education that supports this, is it's more important to be passionate about a topic to do well in a course than it is to just that it's an easy course. And so it's a really interesting dynamic. And you've all been through this, I'm sure. Oh, I'm going to take this course, it's on the psychology of aging in the Middle Ages or whatever it is. And I heard it's super easy. You know what? You get a B because you don't really care. You don't like it. And it's hard to do. It's hard to get motivated for. Maybe it's not as easy, but maybe you love chemistry. Let's do a minor in chemistry because you'll want to do it. Maybe you love math. Maybe you love learning languages. Maybe you're interested in international affairs or politics or sport management, or whatever the case may be. Really do that. Don't listen to people say, oh, this is an easy one, or that they like to do. You really, really want to reflect and do there. The third point there is a really big one. And I mean, you see this as professors all the time. Parents want their kids to have jobs, right? And so they're always asking these questions. Well, who hires you? What are the starting salaries? A lot of students don't think about that, particularly student athletes. So opt for one that gets you towards a job. So maybe you love music as a passion, but you know careers are tough. Find another way to integrate music into your life, and maybe you do accounting, right? You think about these kind of pieces that think about where you want to go and what you want to do. And I'm not saying that's the right answer, but think those pieces through as you kind of do it, and then we'll get you that employed piece at the end. Take nothing for granted. It's a pretty intuitive one. And we have a bunch of anecdotes of this particular secret about both the athletic and the academic side, where you think things are going to be easy because you're a student athlete. And really, you're the big man or big woman on campus. Often you're treated really, really well. That's not going to happen when you graduate, right? There'll be a few alums that think you're great, but how do you make sure that you're set up for success as a professional afterwards? One major, and lots of sports psychology stuff have looked at this, one major thing we all deal with as students are highs and lows, right? Really awful projects, a bad group work experience, a crappy professor, a bad grade, you didn't plan properly, so you bomb an exam. And then we have the highs, you ace something, you have a wicked lab partner, you get 100% in that. Those kind of pieces are high. You double that as a student athlete, right? Because maybe you're on a team that's really struggling. So first of all, you try to stay motivated for school, and your basketball team is 2-17. You got benched on the hockey team because some young upstart took your job as the goalie. Like there's highs and lows. So really managing those psychologically is very, very important. And layer something like COVID on top of that, really, really challenging. Facing reality. So thinking about when you're finishing school, what's waiting for you? What is life? I mean, you get caught up, I did, in this 4-year, incredible utopian experience as a student athlete. Well, you got another 50 to 60, hopefully, years of life to live, and probably 40 to 50 of those to work. Are you ready for that? Are you set up for that? Are you going to be able to psychologically deal with that if you're no longer the big person on campus, so to speak? And so making sure you're set up for what's important for you as you do that. As a senior, and this is something that we did a lot of research on and heard a lot about, is people, as opposed to hanging on and wishing you had another year of eligibility, you flip the switch and say, okay, I'm done. I'm going to maximize my last year and kick butt as a teammate, as an individual, whatever the sport is. But I'm also going to really start setting myself up for the future, right? And it's a mind shift and a mindset that's very, very important as kind of how this goes forward. This is something that I dealt with, and all the authors dealt with, and almost every one of the people we interviewed dealt with, is an identity crisis. So you identify yourself as a high performance athlete, and then all of a sudden you're not anymore, but also your level of performance goes down. You no longer have full-time coaching, you're not training full-time, you're not eating the same way, you don't have the support, you're not as motivated, you don't have the platforms to compete in, and before you know it, you're running 30 seconds a mile slower, or you're jumping 6 inches lower, or your basketball, you can't get around those people you used to be able to get around, or whatever the case may be. So you have to re-gauge, reset your identity. And so you start identifying, well, I'm going to be a communications expert, or I'm now going to become an accountant, or I'm pushing to be a chiropractor. You have to really shift your identity. And it's very important because a lot of former athletes, as you know, get very, very depressed. Find other passions. So this is one that fits into a lot of the things we've talked about before. And here's just a list, and I'm not going to read them. You can look at them, but there's really thinking about, okay, I've got these two massive things to do, sport and academics. I got to fit other stuff in there that's going to help them, particularly the academics and job side. How do I get involved and not do nothing else, which is something that a lot of student athletes do. You become guilty of. I certainly did. You do something else that fits in there. There's points in the year where you're not training, you're not competing. In fact, you're not allowed to do formal training or formal competitions. How do you maximize the pieces at those stage? Invest in yourself, your health, and your future. So this is a secret that's full of a bunch of little tactics. So you think about financial. So you're in the situation where often you've got a full ride. And if you've got any kind of other money coming in, and from an additional scholarship or a summer job or an honorarium that comes in, or maybe get some nil money in the current reality, don't go blow it on a keg party, right? Don't go blow it on a new set of clothes. Put it away. Like, as we all know, when you get to be, my age now, I'm almost 50, money I put away 30 years ago, I can tell you it's worth a lot right now. And money you may have put into real estate or another venture or the stock market 20 years ago if you're wise with it, can be worth a lot of money now. And so you obviously want to have fun, enjoy your life, and do those kind of pieces, but think about your future, your health. The health piece was a big one because a lot of athletes, certain sports more than others, really immediately stop. And so you go from being this ripped, fit machine for whatever your sport was to all of a sudden you put on 5 pounds, then 10 pounds. You can't do as much anymore. You struggle with things. And that's hard on anybody, but it's extra hard on the athlete identity and personality. So thinking about your health going, you can have the same standards, but you want to have other ones as you kind of think about where you're going. And here's a couple of pieces that are from that secret. I mentioned money. I mentioned the rigorous of training. So you think about how do you create a lifestyle that has some physical activity in it. Maybe you pick up a whole new sport. One thing a lot of really successful high performance athletes recommend is trying something completely different. So you're an Olympic swimmer. Why don't you pick up canoeing, right? You like being on the water, but you're not going to be that good at it. And intentionally picking something where you're not actually going to be that good. It's going to be good for fitness, nice and fun. Like an Olympic swimmer picks up CrossFit, before you know it, they'll be the best athlete in their box, right? Because they're a lethal athlete. So pick something where you don't have transferability and it can just be fun. Is something that some of the athletes recommended. And I know I've been really talking a lot about the career side, but there is a massive advantage to having been a student athlete. There's alumni, there's boosters, there's people within those sports, that understand you. You got to maximize that as well. If someone's given a scholarship to your team that's done well in life afterwards, and this happens on every team, I give back to the teams that I participated on. How do you engage with them? They could help you a lot, right, as you go forward, for example. As you're coming out, thinking about your brand, right? So we talked about identity, but also how am I going to include all these pieces and what am I going to put on my resume? What does my bio look like as I go forward? What steps am I going to take? Really thinking about your brand. And then, as I mentioned, a lot being fiscally smart. As you're coming out, we talked a lot about this secret, managing those monies you get fortunate enough to have very, very efficiently. And then the last one was prepare for your future by tracking trends. And so one thing that smart students do, but student athletes often do not, is really figuring out where the future is going to take them. And so whatever your major is, whatever your career objectives are, what's happening out there? Like right now, it's really, really crazy. If you're a nurse, you've got a gazillion job options, right? They're everywhere. If you wanted to be in the tourism industry, you're having a really awful time. And so you got to stay on top of these things, because what was relevant when you decided as a freshman that you wanted to do that may not be relevant anymore. And thinking about how do you do that and then positioning yourself for success, way back to what I talked about in secret number 2, that competitor who's not a student athlete, but's got 3 internships, global experiences, club memberships, extra skills, all these kind of pieces that you're going to have to try to beat out to get that job that you actually want. And with that, Connor, I will wrap up what we talked, the topic for this evening.